"We don't need you anymore," my daughter said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a knife wrapped in velvet. The room fell silent just long enough for my heart to stutter. Then wine splashed across my blouse. Warm liquid slid down my neck, soaking the lace collar I'd ironed that afternoon. Somewhere to my right, Aunt Ruby gasped, and Cousin Lila let out a nervous laugh that leaned too close to pleasure. I stood there in the center of Vanessa's gleaming dining room, surrounded by crystal and candlelight, trying to understand how I'd become the evening's entertainment. My own daughter, the child I'd raised on a teacher's salary after her father died, stood at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, her expression calm, almost pleased, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Mom," she said slowly, pressing weight into every syllable, "you've gotten a little too comfortable here. This isn't your house. You have until sunrise to pack your things." Her words landed like stones. Around her, the guests shifted, suddenly absorbed in their napkins. Derek leaned back in his chair, smirking, his thumb tracing the rim of his glass. He looked like a man who just won something. The room's rhythm changed, the clink of silverware, the hush of whispers, laughter smothered halfway through. Every sound pressed in on me. My face burned, not from the wine, but from the humiliation, sharp in my chest and tight at the back of my throat. I wanted to speak, to ask her why, but the question felt too small. Instead, I reached for the napkin, folded it once, and blotted the red from my blouse. My hand didn't shake, not even when the laughter swelled again. Vanessa tilted her head, studying me the way she used to study her reflection, searching for flaws. "You always think you know what's best," she said, casual, rehearsed. "But you don't. You never have." The edge in her voice had been there since college, the one Derek had honed over the years. I remembered the first time he'd called me too sentimental, said I was holding her back. She'd laughed then, brushing it off. Tonight, that same laugh turned sharp. "Vanessa," I said quietly. She lifted a hand, stopping me like a teacher silencing a child. "Please," she said, "let's not make a scene." A scene, that's what she called it, the public unraveling of a mother. The air thickened. Aunt Ruby's perfume clung to my lungs. Derek's cologne lingered like smoke. In the polished silver serving tray, I caught my reflection, smaller than I remembered, lined, my eyes trembling. Every instinct told me to shrink, to apologize for existing in her perfect home, to keep the peace like I always had. But something inside me stayed still. Maybe it was the years of quiet sacrifice, paying their mortgage, covering their debts, pretending not to notice their eyes rolling behind my back. Or maybe it was the sudden clarity that no amount of kindness would ever make me visible to them again. Derek leaned forward, his voice smooth. "Vanessa's right, Charlene. You deserve a place that suits you. We'll even help you find something appropriate." That word, appropriate, struck harder than the wine. He said it the way one talks about old furniture. I looked at him, searching for a trace of shame, but found only satisfaction. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You've lived here almost a year, Mom. It's time you stop clinging to things that aren't yours." Not mine. My gaze drifted around the room, the antique sideboard I'd given them as a wedding gift, the painting from my Asheville living room, the linen curtains I'd sewn by hand. Even the blue-rimmed plates had once been mine. My chest tightened. They'd taken everything, my money, my belongings, my place in their lives, and turned it into decor. Now they were sending me away like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The silence stretched, dense and suffocating. I dabbed the last stain from my sleeve and folded the napkin neatly beside my plate. Then without a word, I reached into my handbag, the old leather one Vanessa liked to mock, and closed my fingers around the small silver key at the bottom. When I set it on the table, it made a soft click that sliced through the air. Every whisper died. Derek's eyes flicked from the key to Vanessa. Her posture stiffened. She knew exactly what it was. "Mom," she said, uncertainty slipping into her voice. "What is that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I let the silence do the work, settling into the room like dust no one could wipe away. Aunt Ruby stopped wringing her hands. Lila stared at her plate, rearranging food that didn't need it. The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier dissolved into a quiet that felt dangerous. I rose slowly, my chair scraping softly against the tile. My heart hammered, but my face stayed calm. When I met my daughter's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: doubt. "You have until sunrise to leave," she repeated, but the words wavered now. I offered a small smile, gentle, almost kind, and said nothing. I wanted to tell her that a mother's silence can speak louder than any shouting. Instead, I lifted my handbag, squared my shoulders, and walked out. Behind me, Derek muttered something before Vanessa cut him off in a sharp whisper. Glasses clinked. I didn't turn around. In the hallway, cool air brushed my skin, and for the first time that night, I realized I wasn't angry. I was free. The wine on my blouse had begun to dry, a dark stain over my heart. As I walked toward the front door, I remembered something my husband Henry used to say. "People show you who they are when they think you have nothing left to give." Tonight, they showed me everything, and before the clock struck midnight, I decided they would never see me beg again. I couldn't sleep that night. The ticking clock in the guest room sounded louder than it ever had, each second pressing against the edge of my thoughts. I sat on the bed, still wearing the blouse with the faint stain from dinner, staring at the small lamp glowing beside me. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows an argument when every wall feels like it's listening. Vanessa's voice kept looping in my head. Calm, measured, cold. "You have until sunrise." The words didn't sound like my daughter's. They belonged to someone else, someone who had forgotten what kindness felt like. I tried to pinpoint when that change began, when the little girl who cried over scraped knees started looking at me like an inconvenience. The moment came easily. I still saw it clearly. Vanessa was 17, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. Her school had accused her of copying an essay. She begged me to fix it, said her future would be ruined. The next morning, I stood in the principal's office and told the lie myself, that I had helped her write it, that it was my fault. They believed me. She graduated without a blemish on her record, and from that day on, something in her eyes shifted. She learned that someone else could carry the consequences of her mistakes, that someone was me. At the time, I thought I was protecting her. I told myself love meant stepping in, holding her steady, keeping her safe. But over the years, that love turned into something she expected, instead of something she valued. Every sacrifice became invisible. When Henry died and it was just the two of us, I believed we'd grow closer. Instead, the distance widened with every favor I did. When Derek entered her life, I hoped he'd make her happy. At first, he was charming, polite, attentive, always offering help. But the charm wore thin. He made comments about how I worried too much about money, how Vanessa needed to stop thinking small. He called me careful, but the word sounded like an accusation. Before long, Vanessa began repeating him. The first time she asked for money, it was for a mortgage payment. Just a few weeks behind, she said, until Derek's next paycheck. It was $3,600. I gave it to her without hesitation. She didn't say thank you, only, "You're a lifesaver, Mom." The next time, it was $8,500 for a short-term loan. Derek promised to repay it. He never did. The third time, she called crying. "Mom, my boutique is in trouble," she said. "If I lose this, everything falls apart." I wired her $11,200 that same day. She didn't answer my calls for 2 weeks afterward. Each time, I promised myself it would be the last. Each time, I gave in anyway. I started tracking everything in a small blue notebook. Every payment, every promise, every word that cut too deep. At first, I told myself it was for my memory, but as the pages filled, I understood it wasn't about the money. It was about how they made me feel. Small. Some sentences never left me. "You're holding me back. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. Stop acting like you matter so much." Vanessa delivered them calmly, dismissively, like I was a burden she'd outgrown. Each time, I swallowed my pride. I wanted peace. I wanted her love. The last time she asked for help, she didn't even call. Derek left a folder on my kitchen counter with a note that read, "Just sign here." He said it was a small adjustment to their loan, nothing serious. I hesitated. Vanessa stood behind him, arms crossed, watching. "Mom, stop being dramatic," she said. "It's just paperwork." So I signed. Weeks later, I learned it allowed them to take out another loan under my credit. I wrote that down too. The notebook grew heavy. I kept it hidden in the drawer beside my bed, beneath old letters and photographs. Some nights I took it out and traced the words with my fingers, reading until my vision blurred. I wasn't angry then, not yet. I was tired. Tired of being needed only when something went wrong. Tired of pretending not to see their eye rolls, of believing that one more sacrifice might finally make them see me. Sitting there in that quiet room after dinner, I thought about all the years I'd spent fixing things, saving them. And I realized that maybe that was why Vanessa had no trouble pouring the wine. Maybe she assumed I'd clean it up the way I cleaned up everything else. But this time was different. I looked at the clock again. Midnight. Sunrise wasn't far off. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to fix what was broken. I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in years. A calm, steady certainty that I was done being invisible. The morning after that dinner, the house felt smaller. Light filtered through the blinds in thin stripes, casting shadows over boxes I hadn't packed yet. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, staring at the old leather bag I'd left beside the chair. My hands rested flat on the table, palms open, almost as if I needed proof that I still existed. I had always believed silence was strength, but that morning it felt like weight. The words from last night looped in my mind again and again, each one carving a deeper space inside me. "You have until sunrise." She'd said it like she was reading a recipe, steady and detached, like I wasn't her mother, but a stranger who had wandered in. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, the sound almost oppressive. I thought about leaving right then, just walking out, never looking back. But there was something inside me that wouldn't let me move. I kept thinking about Henry. He would have known what to do. He always did. I glanced toward the back door and imagined him out there in his work boots, sanding the porch railing or patching the shed roof. He used to whistle while he worked, that soft, tuneless whistle that meant everything was fine. I hadn't heard it in years, but I could still feel it in the air. When I finally stood up, my legs felt heavier than they should have been. I went upstairs to my room to start packing, but instead of folding clothes, I found myself staring out the window, my eyes locked on the distant mountains. The fog was low and thick, clinging to the earth and obscuring the road. I'm not sure why, but something pulled me toward the attic. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was Henry himself, nudging me from somewhere I couldn't see. He used to call the attic his thinking room. I hadn't been up there in years. The pull was strong enough that I followed it. The stairs creaked under my weight, and the smell of old cedar and dust greeted me halfway up. The attic door groaned when I pushed it open, the hinges stiff with time. Inside, sunlight pierced through a small round window, cutting a thin line through the shadows. Boxes were stacked along the walls, covered in sheets. I pulled one down, sneezed from the dust, and then I saw it. Henry's wooden chest. He'd built it himself the year before he passed. I knelt beside it, tracing the lid with my fingers before lifting it open. Inside were pieces of our life. His old wristwatch, the faded flannel he wore every winter, a few photographs of us at Brookside House, the two of us, younger, laughing on the porch steps, and then, beneath those, a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. I sat back on my heels for a moment before opening it. His words were simple, steady, written with the same calm I remembered. "Charlene, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to help you. You've carried this family for longer than they'll ever realize. If Vanessa turns against you, don't be afraid. Brookside House is yours alone. I made sure of it. You'll find the papers here. Keep them safe. You'll know when to use them." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. That's when the tears came, the kind that don't rush out, but fall slow, as if they've been waiting for permission. All these years, I had thought Henry left me to carry everything alone. I was wrong. He'd seen it coming. He knew the kind of person Vanessa had become, and even after he was gone, he'd tried to protect me. I found the folder he mentioned. Inside were legal papers and a deed, dated almost 10 years ago, transferring full ownership of Brookside House to me. There was even a note from his attorney confirming it. My hands shook as I read the words over and over until they no longer looked like words, but freedom. Derek and Vanessa had no claim to it. They thought they did, but they didn't. It hit me then, the unfairness of it all. I had paid for everything, their home, their debts, their dreams, and yet they'd told me I didn't belong. I paid for every part of their comfort, and still, I was made to feel like a burden. I thought of that night, Vanessa's wine glass raised like a weapon, Derek's smirk as he told me I deserved somewhere appropriate. The anger inside me was quiet but firm, not wild or loud. It came from knowing the truth and finally being ready to use it. That's when I made a choice. I could have gone to Vanessa and shouted, waved the papers in her face, demanded an apology she would never mean, but that would have made me small again. Instead, I picked up Henry's letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in my pocket. I called the only person I trusted, Miriam Ortiz, my old friend from Raleigh who used to work as an attorney. When she answered, her voice was warm and steady. "Charlene, it's been years," she said. "What's going on?" "I need your help," I said simply, "and I need it to stay quiet." The next morning I drove through the fog toward her house. We sat at her kitchen table, coffee between us, as I spread the papers out. Miriam read them, her brow furrowing, then looked up at me with disbelief. "Charlene, you own everything," she said, "every bit of it." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The words felt too big to say. When I finally did, my voice was soft. "Then I think it's time they remember that." That was the turning point. From that moment on, I stopped thinking like a mother trying to earn her place and started thinking like a woman who had been wronged for too long. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek revenge with anger. I did it with calm. I signed the transfer documents, froze the accounts, and secured the deed. By the time the rain started that evening, the sound of it on the roof didn't trap me anymore. It sounded new, something clean. I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel invisible. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. The first sign that my plan had worked came 3 days later. It was early morning, the sky over Asheville still heavy with gray clouds, when my phone began to buzz. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Vanessa's name lit up the screen again and again, but I let it ring. For once, I didn't rush to answer. I poured myself a cup of coffee instead and stood by the window, watching rain darken the garden soil. Outside, everything looked calm. Somewhere else, Charlotte, the house that once felt like mine, a storm was breaking. By noon, the messages began. At first, they were brief. "Mom, call me." Then, "It's urgent." By evening, the tone had shifted. "What did you do?" That one made me pause. I could hear her voice in those words, tight, frightened, edged with anger. I set the phone down and allowed myself a faint smile. I didn't need to read further to know what had happened. Derek's confidence had finally collided with consequence. Later that afternoon, Miriam called to confirm it. "Everything's finalized," she said. "The bank notified me this morning. The house title and all financial accounts are officially under your control. They can't access a single dollar without your approval." I thanked her quietly, my heart beating harder than I expected. I wasn't proud. I wasn't exhilarated. What I felt ran deeper. Relief, threaded with a sadness I couldn't quite name. Winning against your own child leaves no room for celebration. That evening, the real chaos unfolded. Vanessa's calls turned into voicemails, long ones that started calm and unraveled into shouting. "Mom, Derek's cards were declined. The mortgage company says they can't process our payment without your signature. What did you do? You're destroying everything." She twisted guilt with practiced precision. For years, that tone had worked on me, the one that made refusal feel like cruelty. But now, the guilt slid off without taking hold. I remembered every time she'd called me dramatic. Every time Derek rolled his eyes when I asked a simple question. I remembered the wine soaking into my blouse, the laughter that followed, the way she said, "You have until sunrise." Those memories steadied me. By the second day, panic turned into accusation. "You've ruined our lives. You've humiliated us. Everyone's talking about it." I pictured her pacing the kitchen, the one filled with furniture I'd paid for, her nails tapping against her phone. Derek was probably in his office, pretending control while everything he'd built on my name collapsed beneath him. It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It just made me tired. Aunt Ruby called next, her voice sweet with a sharpened edge beneath it. "Charlene, honey, they're saying you froze their accounts. Is that true? Surely there's been some misunderstanding. Family is family after all." "Ruby," I said gently, "family is supposed to take care of each other. That's all I've ever done." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Well, you've certainly made a mess of things." She hung up before I could reply. It was remarkable how quickly concern turned into blame once the money stopped. Cousin Lila left a message too, saying she didn't want to take sides, but she already had. They all had. They preferred the version of me who gave endlessly and asked for nothing in return. That night, I sat on the porch of Brookside House, a blanket pulled around my shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt safe. I turned the silver key over in my hand, the same one I'd left on Vanessa's table, and remembered the confusion on her face. Somewhere inside, she must have known that her hold on me had ended right then. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. Vanessa's voice shook. "Mom, please, we can't make the next payment. Derek says you changed everything. You're punishing us over one mistake. Isn't that enough?" Her tone was soft now, pleading, but it wasn't love. It was desperation. I waited a moment before responding. "You told me to leave by sunrise," I said quietly. "I did. You just never asked where I was going." Silence followed, then the line went dead. I sat there for a long moment staring at the phone. I thought I might feel victorious. Instead, I felt still. Not empty, not regretful, just calm. I no longer needed to justify myself. By the end of the week, the calls stopped. A neighbor later mentioned that Derek's business had collapsed. Their friends drifted away. The people who once admired their success stopped returning messages. Their world unraveled quietly, the same way mine once had. But this time, I wasn't the one gathering the pieces. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't begging to be forgiven. I sat in the home Henry had left me and listened as the rain began again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a problem that needed fixing. I was exactly where I was meant to be, steady, whole, and free. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window at Brookside House, catching the dust as it drifted lazily through the air. The house had been empty for so long, yet it didn't feel lonely. I brewed coffee in the same old pot Henry and I had used for years, and for the first time, the silence didn't ache. It soothed me. I could hear birds outside, the low hum of wind, the gentle creak of worn floorboards beneath my feet. Peace had a sound after all. I'd simply forgotten how to listen for it. On the third morning, an envelope arrived in the mail, postmarked from Raleigh. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman I didn't immediately recognize. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," it began, "I wanted to thank you for helping my family years ago when we had nowhere to turn. You probably don't remember, but you paid our electric bill one winter. We never forgot your kindness." I sat there with the letter resting in my lap, my throat tightening. After everything that had been said about me, that I was selfish, that I'd ruined my daughter's comfort, here was proof that my kindness had mattered. Not because of what I gave, but because I gave it without needing to disappear afterward. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the garden. The air smelled of rain and rich earth. The same garden Henry once tended was still alive with small white roses, sturdier than they appeared. I knelt, pressed my hand into the soil, and breathed. Slowly, the pain, the insults, the cold looks from Vanessa softened into something distant, like the echo of a storm that had already passed. That peace didn't last long. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice came sharp, but thinner somehow. Smaller. "Mom, I know you think you've won," she said, "but everyone knows what you did. People are talking. You've made us look terrible." I pictured her, arms crossed, chin lifted, trying to sound strong while everything beneath her was unraveling. I took a breath before replying. "I didn't do anything to you, Vanessa," I said calmly. "I just stopped doing everything for you." Silence. Then I heard her swallow. "You've turned everyone against us," she said, anger wavering into disbelief. Our friends won't even talk to us anymore. Are you happy now? The question landed deeper than I expected. Happiness hadn't been my goal. I'd wanted peace, not revenge. Still, I couldn't deny the quiet relief of knowing she finally understood what abandonment felt like. I hope one day you learn that love isn't something you use up, I said softly. Because once it's gone, it never comes back the same. She didn't answer. I heard a small sniffle, then the call ended. I set the phone down and stood by the window for a long time. The resentment I'd carried for years began to loosen, not because she apologized, but because I no longer needed her to. The version of myself that had spent a lifetime trying to be enough finally felt finished. A few days later, another message arrived, this one unexpected. Charlene, it read, we could really use your help organizing donations at the church pantry this weekend. We remember how you always brought homemade pies for the volunteers. Would you consider coming back? The warmth that spread through my chest surprised me. For so long, I'd been valued only for what I provided my family. Now someone was asking for me, not my money, not my sacrifice, but my presence. I went that Saturday. The church smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh bread. The smiles I received weren't polite or obligatory. They were real. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. When I returned home that evening, the porch light glowed against the darkening sky. I left my phone inside, put on soft music, and sat on the steps with a cup of tea. As the sun sank behind the trees, the mountains turned shades of gold and blue, the kind of beauty that makes you pause. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. Losing my daughter's love still hurt, but I finally understood something Henry had tried to teach me long ago. Peace doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being free. I looked toward the horizon, the silver key glinting in my hand. I kept it not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that even locked doors open when the time is right. The wind brushed my face, cool and steady, and I whispered the truth I'd learned. You don't have to earn love. Sometimes rejection is just love turned inward. I smiled then, not the careful smile I once wore to hide pain, but a real one. The kind that belongs to someone who has finally come home to herself. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible, remember this. Silence isn't weakness, and walking away isn't losing. Sometimes it's the first time you choose yourself.